We think we know the Second World War. We see it as a conflict of clear lines and documented certainties, a story told in grainy newsreels, detailed battle plans, and the stark, unambiguous struggle of good against evil. Its history is a vast archive, a library of official records and eyewitness testimonies that seems to have left no page unturned. But this clarity is an illusion. Beneath the grand narrative of armies and empires lies a darker, stranger history, a world of ghost fleets, vanished soldiers, baffling decisions, and unexplained events that refuse to fit neatly into the official record. These are the stories that linger in the margins, the whispers and enigmas that haunt the memory of the world's greatest conflict, moments where the fog of war never truly lifted. In this epic journey, we will explore 20 of the most baffling mysteries of the Second World War. We will venture into these dark, historical alleyways, from the frozen lakes of Siberia to the humid jungles of the Philippines, from the highest levels of political intrigue to the desperate final acts of individual soldiers. We will sift through the declassified documents, the eyewitness accounts, and the archaeological evidence to understand why these questions, born from the most documented conflict in human history, remain so powerfully unsolved. This is a journey into the ghosts of the Great War. Number 20. The Ghost Plane of Pearl Harbor. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, is one of the most intensely studied events in military history. We know the number of Japanese planes, the ships they sank, the exact minute the attack began. It feels like a story, with no remaining questions. Yet, within the chaos of that morning lies a small but persistent and deeply strange mystery. As the second wave of Japanese planes was leaving the smoking harbor, American radar operators and pilots began reporting something inexplicable. A lone, unidentified aircraft that did not match the profile of any known American or Japanese plane. Eyewitnesses described it as a propeller-driven plane, but with a strange, unfamiliar design. It was caught in the frantic anti-aircraft fire that now filled the sky over Oahu. Several American P-40 Warhawk fighters, returning from a futile attempt to engage the Japanese, gave chase. According to the pilots' after-action reports, they engaged the mysterious aircraft and riddled it with bullets. The plane was seen to crash into the sea, but that was not the end of the story. Later that day, another P-40 pilot, on patrol, reported finding the wreckage of a strange plane on the small, isolated island of Niihau. He described the pilot as being dead in the cockpit, dressed in what appeared to be a flight suit, but with no insignia. Who was this pilot? What was this plane? The most mundane theory is that it was simply a Japanese aircraft, perhaps a late-arriving reconnaissance plane, or a damaged bomber that had gotten separated from its group, and that its unfamiliar appearance was simply due to the confusion of battle. But no Japanese records from the attack mention a plane of its description being lost in that area. Other, more speculative theories have wondered if it was a plane from another nation, a third party, observing the opening moves of the Pacific War. With no wreckage ever recovered and no body ever identified, the strange plane that was shot down during the attack remains a final, baffling footnote to a day of infamy. It is the mystery of the ghost plane of Pearl Harbor. Number 19. The Werewolves of 1945. Imagine the war in Europe is over. Germany has surrendered unconditionally in May 1945. The Allied armies are occupying the ruins of the Third Reich. But the fighting is not entirely over. A new, shadowy threat emerges. Small groups of die-hard Nazi fanatics, former SS men, and Hitler Youth refuse to accept defeat. They take to the forests and mountains to wage a clandestine guerrilla war against the occupying forces, conducting assassinations of Allied appointed German officials, acts of sabotage, and attacks on isolated military posts. This was the threat of the werewolf insurgency. The werewolf plan was a real Nazi initiative, conceived by Heinrich Himmler in the last months of the war. It was intended to be a national, stay-behind resistance movement that would use guerrilla tactics to make the Allied occupation of Germany impossible. But the central mystery is how real and how effective this movement actually was. Did it represent a genuine, coordinated, strategic threat? Or was it little more than a collection of scattered, desperate, and ultimately insignificant acts of last-ditch resistance. The historical record is deeply ambiguous. There were indeed documented cases of assassinations and sabotage carried out by groups calling themselves werewolves. The most famous was the murder of the Allied appointed mayor of Aachen. However, many historians argue that the threat was massively exaggerated, both by Nazi propaganda in the final days of the war and by Allied intelligence afterwards. The Allies may have inflated the werewolf threat to justify their continued, harsh occupation policies and to maintain discipline among their own troops. The mystery lies in separating the reality of these desperate, fanatical holdouts from the potent myth that surrounded them. Were they a genuine insurgency, or the last, dying howl of a defeated regime? Number 18. The captain's last decision. Imagine you are the captain of one of the most powerful warships in the world. It is December 1939, the early months of the war. Your ship, a German pocket battleship, has been terrorizing Allied merchant shipping in the South Atlantic for months. But now, you have been cornered. After a fierce battle against 3 British cruisers, your damaged ship has sought refuge in the neutral port of Montevideo, Uruguay. You are trapped. A powerful British naval force is gathering just outside the harbor, waiting for you. You have a choice: stay and be interned for the rest of the war, or make a desperate run for it and face almost certain annihilation. But you choose a third option, one that baffles the world. This was the dilemma facing Captain Hans Langsdorff of the formidable German cruiser Admiral Graf Spee. After the Battle of the River Plate, he had 3 days to repair his ship in the neutral port. British intelligence launched a masterful campaign of deception, using local agents and fake radio traffic to convince Langsdorff that a massive, unbeatable British fleet, including the aircraft carrier Ark Royal and the battlecruiser Renown, was lying in wait for him. In reality, the British force was much weaker than he believed. On December 17th, thousands of spectators in Montevideo watched as the Graf Spee steamed out of the harbor. They expected a final, glorious naval battle. Instead, the ship sailed just a few miles out and dropped anchor. Its crew was taken off by German merchant ships. Then, a series of massive explosions ripped through the vessel. Captain Langsdorff had chosen to scuttle his own powerful warship rather than let it fall into enemy hands or risk the lives of his crew in a hopeless battle. 3 days later, in a hotel room in Buenos Aires, having written letters ensuring his crew would be treated well, Captain Langsdorff, a man known for his chivalry and honor, wrapped himself in an old Imperial German naval ensign and shot himself. The central mystery is not what he did, but why. Was he completely fooled by the British deception? Was he suffering from battle fatigue? Or was his final act a protest against a war he no longer believed in? A final, tragic decision of a captain caught between his duty and his honor. Number 17. The Gibraltar crash. Imagine it is July 4th, 1943. The war is at a critical turning point. A Liberator bomber aircraft is taking off from the heavily fortified British runway at Gibraltar. On board is one of the most important figures of the Allied coalition, General Władysław Sikorski, the Prime Minister of the Polish government in exile, and the Commander-in-Chief of the Polish Armed Forces. Just 16 seconds after takeoff, the plane loses altitude, stalls, and crashes into the sea. Of the 16 people on board, only the pilot survives. General Sikorski is dead. The official British Court of Inquiry ruled the crash an accident caused by the plane's flight controls jamming for an unknown reason. But the timing of the crash was extraordinarily convenient for Sikorski's allies and deeply suspicious to many Poles, then and now. Just a few months earlier, Sikorski had created a massive diplomatic crisis between the Allies. After the Germans discovered the Katyn Forest massacre, Sikorski refused to accept the Soviet denial and furiously demanded an independent investigation, threatening to shatter the fragile alliance with Joseph Stalin, whom Churchill and Roosevelt desperately needed. His death removed the single biggest obstacle to Allied unity. Was it truly an accident? Or was it a perfectly executed political assassination? Theories have swirled for decades. Was it a Soviet plot, carried out by agents in Gibraltar to silence the man who knew the truth about Katyn? Was it a British plot, orchestrated by their intelligence services to remove a troublesome ally for the greater good of the war effort? Or was it even an internal Polish plot, carried out by his political rivals who disagreed with his policies? The pilot, who survived, was never able to offer a clear explanation. Key documents from the British inquiry remain classified. The death of General Sikorsky remains one of the most politically charged and suspicious events of the war. Number 16. The Paradise Island murder. Imagine a place of incredible wealth and glamour, far removed from the battlefields of Europe. It is the Bahamas in July 1943, a British colonial outpost governed by none other than the Duke of Windsor, the former King Edward VIII, who had abdicated his throne. The island is a hotbed of wealthy expatriates, high society gossip, and rumoured Nazi sympathisers. In this paradise, the richest man in the British Empire, a gold mining magnate named Sir Harry Oakes, is found brutally murdered in his bed. He had been bludgeoned to death, his body partially burned and covered in feathers, in what appeared to be a bizarre ritualistic killing. The investigation was immediately taken over by the Duke of Windsor himself, who, in a series of baffling decisions, seemed more interested in controlling the narrative than in finding the killer. He refused help from experienced detectives from Scotland Yard and instead brought in 2 Miami police officers with questionable reputations. Their investigation was swift and clumsy. Within 2 days, they had arrested Sir Harry's son-in-law, a charismatic French aristocrat named Alfred de Marigny, charging him with the murder. The case against him was flimsy, based primarily on a single fingerprint that many believed was planted. At trial, de Marigny was dramatically acquitted, and so the mystery deepens. If de Marigny didn't do it, who did? The theories are a sprawling rabbit hole of conspiracy. Was it an organized crime hit connected to Sir Harry's plans to bring legalized gambling to the island? Was it connected to his business dealings and a secret scheme to move his vast fortune out of the Stirling area? Or was it? Number 15. The vanishing of the righteous man. Imagine it is 1944, in Budapest, Hungary. The city is a vortex of terror, as Adolf Eichmann and the SS are ruthlessly deporting hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews to the death camps. In the midst of this horror, a single man arrives, armed not with a weapon, but with diplomatic status and immense moral courage. He is a Swedish diplomat, and he begins one of the most remarkable rescue operations of the entire war. He designs and issues thousands of official-looking Swedish passports, the Schutzpass, placing Jews under the protection of the Swedish crown. He rents dozens of buildings, declaring them part of the Swedish legation and turning them into safe houses. He personally confronts SS officers on the death march routes and at the train stations, pulling people directly out of the lines, literally snatching them from the jaws of death. This was the work of Raoul Wallenberg. He is credited with saving the lives of tens of thousands of people. In January 1945, as the Soviet Red Army liberated Budapest from the Nazis, Wallenberg, the hero, went to meet with the Soviet commander. He was never seen as a free man again. The Soviets arrested him, accusing him of being an American spy. He was transported to Moscow and imprisoned in the infamous Lubyanka prison. The official Soviet explanation, offered years later, was that he died of a heart attack in his cell in 1947. But this story has never been believed. For decades, other prisoners in the Gulag system reported seeing or speaking with the mysterious Swede. Sightings were reported as late as the 1980s. Why did the Soviets, his supposed allies, arrest this humanitarian hero? Were they suspicious of his contacts with American intelligence? Did he know too much about Soviet post-war plans for Europe? Or was he simply swallowed by the paranoid, bureaucratic cruelty of the Stalinist regime? Number 14. The Amber Room. Imagine a room, a grand chamber in a royal palace, that is itself a single, breathtaking jewel. It is a space so opulent, so unique, that it was hailed by all who saw it as the eighth wonder of the world. Its walls were not painted or wallpapered. They were constructed from over 6 tons of pure, gleaming amber, the fossilized resin of ancient trees, representing a palette of a dozen different shades, from milky white to deep, blood red. These amber panels were intricately carved into magnificent mosaics, garlands of flowers, and heraldic coats of arms, all of it backed with shimmering gold leaf and giant mirrors designed to catch the candlelight and make the entire 180-square-foot chamber glow with a warm, almost divine inner fire. This was the Amber Room, created in the early 18th century by German and Russian craftsmen for Frederick, the first king of Prussia. It was later gifted to the Russian Tsar, Peter the Great, as a symbol of the powerful alliance between their two nations against Sweden. It was installed in the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg, where for nearly 200 years it was the pride of the Russian Tsars, a priceless symbol of imperial power and artistic achievement. When the German army invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, their rapid advance put the palace directly in their path. Curators, realizing the amber was too old and brittle to be dismantled quickly and safely, attempted a desperate deception, hiding the magnificent room behind flimsy false walls of wallpaper. But the ruse failed. The Germans knew exactly what they were looking for. They found the room, expertly disassembled it in just 36 hours, packed it into 27 custom-built crates, and shipped it to Königsberg Castle in what was then East Prussia. It was put on display there, a grand trophy of war. And then, in the final chaotic days of the war in 1945, as the Soviet Red Army encircled and annihilated the city of Königsberg, the Amber Room vanished from history. What was its fate? Did it burn in the fires that consumed the castle during a massive Allied bombing raid in 1944? Its precious organic amber turning to ash? Was it hastily packed back into its crates and loaded onto a ship, perhaps the ill-fated passenger liner Wilhelm Gustloff, that was then sunk by a Soviet submarine in the Baltic Sea, sending the treasure to the bottom of the ocean? Or was it successfully hidden away by a fanatical Nazi official, like the Gauleiter Erich Koch, in one of the many secret mines or bunkers across Europe? For decades, treasure hunters and intelligence agencies have searched for it, but only a few small, authenticated fragments have ever been recovered. The fate of this priceless, lost masterpiece of art remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the war. Number 13. The submarine at the bottom of a lake. Lake Lubinka is a place of deep solitude and profound cold. It is a remote, dark, and chillingly deep body of water located in one of the most desolate and sparsely populated regions on the planet T, the Pole of Cold in Yakutia, Siberia. A place where temperatures can plummet to unimaginable depths. Local Yakut legend has long held that it is a place of mystery, home to a monster they call the Labinkir Devil, a creature that snatches reindeer from the shore. But in the 21st century, a far stranger and more modern mystery emerged from its dark, icy depths, one that has nothing to do with folklore. In 2013, a team of Russian researchers was conducting a scientific expedition on the lake. While using a sophisticated sonar scanner to map the lake floor, they discovered a series of bizarre, geometric objects on the bottom. Even more strangely, as they analyzed the data, they found what appeared to be the distinct, unmistakable shape of a World War II-era submarine, resting silently in the deep water, hundreds of feet below the surface. The sonar images were clear, showing a conning tower and a long, cylindrical hull. How could a submarine from the 1940s possibly have gotten into a remote, landlocked Siberian lake, thousands of miles from any ocean, in a region with no railways and few roads, a place that is frozen solid for most of the year? The discovery baffled scientists. There are no navigable rivers connecting the lake to the sea. Transporting a submarine overland through such inhospitable, mountainous terrain would have been a monumental, if not impossible, logistical feat. During the war, some have speculated that it could be a secret prototype from a nearby Gulag camp, where prisoners were forced to work on clandestine weapons projects far from prying eyes. Others have wondered if it could be part of a secret Lend-Lease transfer between the US and the Soviet Union, a smaller submarine perhaps delivered by air in pieces and assembled on site for testing, which was then lost in an accident and subsequently covered up. Still others have questioned the sonar readings themselves, suggesting they might be an unusual natural rock formation that only looks like a submarine, but the shape remains stubbornly, recognizably that of a man-made vessel. It is a mystery that defies all logical explanation. Number 12. The secrets of Room 40. Sometimes, the greatest mysteries are not about what was lost, but about what was found and how. During the First World War, the British Admiralty's brilliant code-breaking section was known simply as Room 40. Its crowning achievement was the deciphering of the Zimmermann telegram, the secret message that helped bring the United States into the war and sealed Germany's fate. During the Second World War, its far more famous successor was the Government Code and Cipher School at Bletchley Park, the home of the monumental Enigma breaking operation. But there is a tantalizing mystery that connects these two generations of codebreakers, a story of a secret that may have been Bletchley Park's greatest weapon. The success of Bletchley Park in breaking the German Enigma code was one of the most crucial secrets of the war, an intelligence coup that shortened the conflict by an estimated 2 years. Their success depended on having an Enigma machine to study, and it is well known that the Polish Cipher Bureau provided the British with crucial early breakthroughs and a replica machine. But to read the traffic consistently, Bletchley Park needed a steady supply of the daily codebooks and rotor wiring updates that the German military used to change their settings. The official story credits this vital intelligence to daring captures of German U-boats at sea, like that of the U-110, where sailors risked their lives to snatch the codebooks from the sinking submarine. But there is a persistent, shadowy rumor of another, deeper, and far more clandestine source. The rumor states that a secret, back-channel deal was struck, an echo from the previous war. It suggests that the aging spymasters from the original Room 40, men who had broken German naval codes in the First World War, had maintained a secret relationship with their old counterparts in German naval intelligence men who were patriotic Germans, but who despised Hitler and the Nazi regime. According to this theory, these German officers, likely in the anti-Nazi circle of Admiral Wilhelm Canaris of the Abwehr, secretly provided the British with the vital codebooks they needed, not as an act of treason to their country, but as an act of patriotism to save Germany from the ultimate ruin they knew the Nazis would bring upon it. It is a theory that, by its very nature, can likely never be proven, a whisper of clandestine cooperation in a world of total war. Number 11. The blood-soaked U-boat. In October 1943, the German U-boat U-537 embarked on a successful secret mission to set up an automated weather station on the coast of Labrador, Canada, a testament to the long reach of the submarine fleet. But the story of another U-boat on a secret mission is far more mysterious and gruesome. According to a persistent naval legend, a German U-boat was found adrift off the coast of a neutral country, possibly Argentina, a known refuge for fleeing Nazis several months after the war in Europe had officially ended in May 1945. A boarding party, expecting to find a surrendered crew or perhaps a ghost ship, instead discovered a scene of unimaginable horror. The entire crew was dead, but they had not died of starvation, dehydration, or enemy action. They had apparently killed one another in a sudden, inexplicable frenzy of mutual slaughter. The cramped, claustrophobic interior of the submarine was a charnel house, spattered with blood, with bodies found hacked and bludgeoned with wrenches, knives, and any other heavy object the sailors could find. There was absolutely no sign of what could have caused such a sudden, violent, and collective madness. Had the crew been driven insane by the immense psychological pressures of a long, secret patrol, perhaps on a clandestine black mission to transport high-ranking Nazi officials or plundered treasure to South America? Had they been carrying a mysterious, unknown cargo, an experimental chemical or biological agent that had leaked and catastrophically affected their minds, inducing extreme paranoia and aggression? Or had they simply succumbed to a deadly, extreme form of cabin fever, where months of tension, isolation, and fear finally exploded into a homicidal free-for-all. With the entire crew dead and no logbook left to explain the final, bloody hours, the truth of what happened in the silent, pressurized world of that U-boat was lost forever. Number 10. The Katyn Forest Massacre. Cover-up. In the spring of 1943, in the Katyn Forest near Smolensk in occupied Russia, German forces made a horrifying discovery. They unearthed a series of deep mass graves containing the bodies of thousands of Polish military officers, intelligentsia, and public servants. They had all been systematically executed, bound with their hands behind their backs, and shot one by one in the base of the skull. Nazi Germany immediately seized upon the discovery for a massive propaganda campaign, claiming it was clear proof of the barbarity of their Soviet enemy. They alleged, correctly, that the murders had been carried out by the Soviet secret police, the NKVD, in the spring of 1940, when the region was under Soviet control following the joint invasion of Poland. The Soviet Union, in turn, reacted with performative outrage. They vehemently denied the accusation and countered with their own elaborate lie, blaming the massacre on the invading German army. They claimed the Nazis had captured the Polish officers in 1941 and had murdered them then. For the Allied powers, Britain, and the United States, this created a terrible dilemma. Their own intelligence, including the types of bullets used and the age of the trees planted over the graves, strongly suggested the Soviets were responsible. But Joseph Stalin was their most crucial ally in the war against Hitler. To publicly acknowledge Soviet guilt would mean siding with Nazi propaganda and fracturing the fragile Grand Alliance at the most critical phase of the war. And so, for the sake of victory, a terrible political decision was made. The Allies chose to publicly support the Soviet version of events, suppressing evidence to the contrary, and pressuring the Polish government in exile in London to drop their demands for an independent Red Cross investigation. The central mystery is not who committed the massacre after the fall of the Soviet Union. Russia officially acknowledged in 1990 that the NKVD was responsible for executing over 22,000 Polish nationals. The enduring uncomfortable mystery is the full extent of the Allied cover-up. How much did Churchill and Roosevelt know? When did they know it? And how far were they willing to go to placate their monstrous but necessary Soviet ally, even if it meant burying the truth of a horrific war crime? Number 9. The vanishing of Flight 19. On the afternoon of December 5, 1945, just a few months after the end of the war had brought a sense of peace and routine back to military life, 5 U.S. Navy Avenger torpedo bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was a routine overwater navigation training exercise, known as Navigation Problem Number 1, a simple, triangular route over the Atlantic. The flight, designated Flight 19, was led by an experienced flight instructor, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, and the other 13 airmen were all qualified pilots or trainees flying in perfect, clear weather. The mission was supposed to be simple. About an hour and a half into the flight, the control tower received a disturbing radio transmission. It was Lieutenant Taylor. He sounded confused and agitated. He reported that both of his compasses were malfunctioning and that he was lost, unsure of his position. In a series of increasingly garbled and panicked radio transmissions recorded between the pilots, a picture of complete disorientation emerged. Taylor, who had recently been transferred from Miami, seemed to believe they were somewhere over the Florida Keys, a location they should not have been near. He overruled his trainee pilots, some of whom correctly believed they should turn west to head back to the mainland. The transmissions became stranger, with mentions of white water and the ocean looking funny. As the afternoon wore on, the weather began to worsen and darkness fell. The final transmission from the flight was faint and confused, with the pilots seemingly discussing which way to turn as their fuel ran dangerously low. Then, there was only silence. The Navy immediately launched one of the largest air and sea searches in its history. In a bizarre and tragic twist that compounded the mystery, a PBM Mariner flying boat, with a crew of 13, was sent out that same evening as part of the search and rescue operation. It too vanished without a trace. The crew of a nearby tanker, the SS Gaines Mills, reported seeing a massive fireball and explosion in the sky at the exact time and location the mariner would have been, leading to the belief it suffered a catastrophic fuel vapor explosion in mid-air. But of Flight 19 itself, no wreckage, no oil slick, and no bodies were ever found. The Navy's official report blamed the incident on the flight leader's navigational error, but the sheer completeness of the disappearance of 6 aircraft and 27 men has made Flight 19 the foundational mystery of the region that would become known as the Bermuda Triangle. Number 8. The Rudolf Hess Affair. On the night of May 10, 1941, one of the most powerful and historically significant figures in Nazi Germany, Rudolf Hess, the Deputy Führer, a man who had been with Hitler from the earliest days of the Munich Putsch and had personally transcribed Mein Kampf in Landsberg prison, climbed into a specially prepared Messerschmitt Bf 110 fighter plane. He took off from an airfield near Munich and, under the cover of darkness, flew a dangerous 800-mile solo mission across the North Sea to Scotland. He parachuted out of his plane over Renfrewshire and was promptly captured by a surprised local farmer named David McLean, armed with a pitchfork. Hess, one of the most recognizable faces of the Third Reich, claimed he was on a mission of humanity. He had come, he said, to negotiate a peace treaty between Germany and Great Britain, believing that the Duke of Hamilton, a Scottish nobleman he had supposedly arranged to meet, could broker a deal directly with King George VI and the British government. The official line, promoted by both the enraged and publicly embarrassed Hitler and the baffled British, was that Hess was mentally unstable and had acted completely alone, a deluded madman on a bizarre personal quest, likely influenced by his known interest in astrology. But has this explanation ever truly satisfied historians? The central mystery is whether Hess truly did act alone. Was his flight secretly sanctioned by Hitler, a genuine, last-ditch attempt to make peace with Britain and secure Germany's Western Front before launching the massive two-front invasion of the Soviet Union just 6 weeks later? Or was Hess lured to Scotland by a sophisticated British intelligence operation, a honey trap designed to extract secrets from a high-ranking Nazi official by playing on his known eccentricities and desire to restore his waning influence within the party? Why was his lone aircraft not intercepted by the RAF? Hess himself was held in strict captivity for the rest of his life, becoming the sole inmate at Spandau prison in Berlin, where he died in 1987. He took the true story of his bizarre lone flight to the grave. Number 7. The final secret of the U-515. By 1944, the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic had turned decisively against the German U-boats. The happy time was a distant memory, replaced by a period of relentless attrition the Germans called the Great Slaughter. On April 9th, the German submarine U-515, commanded by the decorated ace Werner Henke, was caught on the surface by a massive American hunter-killer group off the coast of Madeira. What followed was not a battle, but a systematic, 3-hour execution. The submarine was bombed by Avenger aircraft from the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal and ruthlessly hunted by multiple destroyers. The American ships hammered the U-boat with Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars projectiles that exploded on contact until finally, mortally wounded and unable to stay submerged, the submarine surfaced amidst the explosions. As shells from the destroyers rained down on the conning tower, the surviving German crew, including Captain Henke, scrambled to abandon ship. But as the submarine began its final, gurgling plunge, stern first into the Atlantic, American sailors on the decks of their destroyers witnessed something inexplicable. They reported seeing several members of the U-boat crew deliberately turn around, fight their way past the sailors trying to escape, and re-enter the conning tower of the sinking vessel, choosing to go down with their ship when they could have easily been saved. Why would they do this? Suicide in the face of capture was not unheard of, but this seemed different, more deliberate. A final, sacrificial duty. The U-515 was rumored to be a special long-range transport submarine. This has led to persistent speculation that the submarine was carrying a secret and incredibly valuable cargo, perhaps gold from European banks, secret documents detailing advanced weapons, technology, or even, as some have theorized, enriched uranium for a clandestine Japanese nuclear program. According to this theory, the crew members who went down with the ship were under strict orders to scuttle the boat and ensure that this cargo, whatever it was never recovered by the Allies. Their final act was one not of despair, but of ultimate, defiant sacrifice to protect a final secret. Number 6. The Man Who Never Was. In April 1943, the body of a man washed ashore on a beach near Huelva in southern Spain. He was dressed in the uniform of a British Royal Marines major, and chained to his wrist was a black briefcase. Inside that briefcase was a treasure trove of what appeared to be top-secret personal letters and official military documents. The documents, seemingly from the highest levels of the Allied command, detailed an upcoming invasion of Europe, but they pointed to the wrong targets. They were an elaborate deception, meticulously designed to make the Germans believe the Allies were planning to invade Greece and Sardinia. The body was discovered by the Spanish authorities, who were officially neutral, but known to be riddled with German Abwehr agents. As British intelligence had meticulously planned, the contents of the briefcase were soon passed on to the German High Command. The German leadership, completely fooled by the ruse, swallowed the bait whole. They diverted entire panzer divisions, ships, and thousands of troops to Greece, fatally weakening their position at the true Allied target, Sicily. The subsequent invasion of Sicily was a major success, significantly shortening the Italian campaign, thanks in large part to this brilliant deception. The operation, codenamed Operation Mincemeat, was one of the most successful and imaginative intelligence coups of the entire war. But there is an enduring mystery at its heart. Who was the man whose corpse they used? For years, his identity was a closely guarded secret. The official story, released decades later, is that it was the body of Glyndwr Michael, a homeless Welshman, who had died from ingesting rat poison. But some researchers and historians have questioned this, suggesting the state of the body as described in Spanish autopsy reports was not consistent with this cause of death, or with prolonged immersion in water. Was the man who never was really a homeless vagrant whose family could not be found? Or was he someone else, whose identity had to be protected at all costs? Perhaps a sailor who had died in the tragic sinking of the submarine HMS Dasher a month earlier, whose body was secretly acquired for the mission. The true identity of the man who fooled Hitler remains a subject of intense and fascinating debate. Number 5. The Subhas Chandra Bose disappearance. He was one of the most charismatic, complex, and controversial figures of the Indian independence movement. Subhas Chandra Bose, unlike Gandhi or Nehru, did not believe in non-violent resistance. A fiery nationalist, he believed that India's freedom could only be won through military force, and he famously declared, "Give me blood, and I shall give you freedom." During World War II, he pursued a strategy of, "My enemy's enemy is my friend," and he traveled to Nazi Germany and then Imperial Japan to seek their help in overthrowing the British Raj. He formed the Indian National Army, composed largely of Indian prisoners of war captured by the Japanese, to fight alongside them against the British in Burma. As the war ended with Japan's surrender in August 1945, Bose was a wanted man, a collaborator in the eyes of the victorious Allies. On August 18, 1945, he boarded a Japanese bomber plane in Taiwan, reportedly heading for Dalian in Manchuria, with the ultimate goal of reaching the Soviet Union to seek a new patron for his cause. According to the official account, the plane suffered a mechanical failure and crashed on takeoff. Bose was said to have been badly burned when his fuel-soaked clothes caught fire, and he died in a Japanese military hospital a few hours later. His body was cremated, and his ashes are now enshrined in the Renkoji Temple in Tokyo. But many in India, to this day, have never believed this story. No photographs were ever released of his body, his injuries, or his cremation. The death certificate was inconsistent, and key witnesses gave conflicting accounts. Many believe that the plane crash was a fabrication, a brilliant ruse designed to allow the great nationalist leader to escape capture by the Allies and go into hiding, perhaps in the Soviet Union or as a reclusive Hindu holy man in India. For decades, the Indian government has been forced to convene multiple inquiry commissions to investigate the matter. The most recent, the Mukherjee Commission, concluded in 2005 that Bose did not die in the purported crash, keeping the mystery officially alive in the minds of millions. Number 4. The fall of Singapore. On February 15, 1942, the British military suffered what Winston Churchill called the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history. The supposedly impregnable island fortress of Singapore, the cornerstone of British power and prestige in Southeast Asia, known as the Gibraltar of the East, surrendered to a numerically inferior, exhausted, and overextended Japanese force. The British and Commonwealth forces defending the island numbered around 85,000 troops. The invading Japanese force, led by General Tomoyuki Yamashita, was only about 36,000 strong and was at the absolute end of a long, tenuous supply line, critically short on ammunition, fuel, and food after a grueling campaign down the Malay Peninsula. Yet, the British commander, Lieutenant General Arthur Percival, surrendered unconditionally. The central mystery is why. Why did a much larger defending force, fighting on its home ground, in a fortress that was supposed to be a bastion of the British Empire, capitulate so quickly? The British strategy had always assumed an attack would come from the sea, and the fortress's famous, massive naval guns were all pointing south to repel a naval invasion. They were largely useless against the Japanese land-based attack, which came from the north. The Japanese army had achieved the impossible by rapidly advancing through the dense Malayan jungle, often using bicycles to outflank the defenders. Even so, Percival's forces still held a massive numerical advantage. The official explanation cites a collapse of morale, chaotic command, and control after the Japanese managed to cross the Strait of Johor, and, crucially, a failure of the city's water supply after the Japanese captured the reservoirs. But many historians now believe the deciding factor was a colossal and masterful bluff by General Yamashita. Knowing his own forces were on the verge of collapse and could not sustain a prolonged battle for the city, he demanded an unconditional surrender. During the negotiations, he confidently exaggerated his force's strength and ruthlessly exploited Percival's fear of a horrific bloodbath if brutal street-to-street fighting were to occur in the densely packed civilian city. Percival, believing the Japanese force to be much larger than it was and seeing his own command structure crumbling, acquiesced. Was it a catastrophic failure of military intelligence, a crisis of command, or was Percival's decision a tragic but perhaps understandable choice to save civilian lives from a horror he was led to believe was inevitable? The reasons for the stunningly swift fall of Singapore are still debated. Number 3. The secret of Die Glocke. Deep within the realm of wartime myths, conspiracy theories, and speculative history lies the story of a secret project so strange, so advanced, it sounds like it was pulled from the pages of a science fiction novel. It is the legend of Die Glocke, or the Bell. According to the claims of a Polish journalist and historian, Igor Witkowski, who said he discovered records of the project in post-war Polish government documents he accessed from a Polish intelligence contact. Die Glocke was a top-secret Nazi wonder weapon being developed at a hidden facility in a mine near the Czech border, under the command of the enigmatic SS General Hans Kammler. The device was described as being made of a heavy, hard metal, roughly 9 feet wide and 12 to 15 feet high, shaped like a large, ornate bell. When activated, it was said to use 2 rapidly counter-rotating cylinders filled with a violet, mercury-like substance code named Zerum 525. The device reputedly consumed massive amounts of electrical power and emitted a powerful, deadly field of radiation that would cause strange crystalline gels to form on the bodies of any plants, animals, or human test subjects exposed to it, leading to their deaths. What was its purpose? Theories range from it being part of an anti-gravity or free energy experiment, to a time travel machine, or a terrifying new type of weapon. The legend is often tied to a strange, Stonehenge-like concrete structure near the site, which believers claim was a test rig for the device. The story concludes that at the end of the war, the device and its chief scientist, General Kammler, who was also in charge of Germany's V-2 rocket program, and who also mysteriously disappeared, were loaded onto a long-range Junkers 390 aircraft and flown to an unknown destination, possibly a secret Nazi base in Antarctica or South America, and never seen again. While mainstream historians dismiss the story as a hoax or a fantasy, lacking any credible primary evidence, the legend of Die Glock persists as one of the most outlandish and compelling mysteries of the Nazi quest for a war-winning wonder weapon. Number 2. The Pope's silence. In the heart of Rome, surrounded by the chaos of a world at war, sat one of the world's most prominent moral authorities, Pope Pius XII. As the head of the Catholic Church, his words carried immense weight. As the details of the Holocaust, the systematic, industrial-scale murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime, began to leak out and were confirmed by Allied and Vatican diplomats, the world looked to the Pope for a clear, public, and unequivocal condemnation. But that condemnation never came. Pope Pius XII, throughout the entire war, never once explicitly and publicly denounced the Nazi genocide. This has led to one of the most profound and painful mysteries of the Second World War. Why the silence? Critics have labeled him Hitler's Pope, arguing that his public silence amounted to a moral failure at best, and a form of complicity at worst. They point to his background as a Germanophile, and his fears that a public denunciation would provoke a massive Nazi backlash against Catholics in Germany and across occupied Europe, or that it would bolster the forces of atheistic communism. Defenders of the Pope argue that he worked tirelessly behind the scenes, using quiet diplomacy and the networks of the Church to hide and save hundreds of thousands of Jews, particularly in Italy. They argue that a loud, public condemnation would have been a futile gesture that would have accomplished nothing but inviting Nazi retaliation and shutting down these secret rescue efforts. The truth, they claim, is that he chose quiet action over loud but empty words. The heart of the mystery lies locked away in the Vatican secret archives. While the archives for his papacy have recently been opened to scholars, the sheer volume of material millions of documents means it will take decades to fully analyze. Until then, the world is left to debate the motives behind one of the most consequential silences in human history. Number 1. The lost Dutch treasure of Amaknak Island. In the spring of 1942, the war in the Pacific was a cascade of disasters for the Allies. As the Japanese military swept across Southeast Asia, the government of the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia, faced a terrible choice. Their vast colonial treasure-eatons of gold bullion, precious jewels, and currency was in imminent danger of falling into Japanese hands. They decided they had to get it to safety in the United States. The treasure was secretly loaded onto a U.S. Navy cruiser, the USS Phoenix, and began a long, perilous journey across the Pacific. But the cruiser was needed for combat duty and could not take the treasure all the way. A new plan was made. The treasure would be temporarily offloaded and hidden at a remote American outpost, Dutch Harbor, on Amaknak Island, in the middle of Alaska's Aleutian Island chain. In May 1942, the treasure was reputedly buried in secret somewhere on the barren, windswept island, with the plan being to retrieve it once the threat had passed. Just 1 month later, in June 1942, the Japanese attacked Dutch Harbor and occupied the nearby islands of Attu and Kiska. The small group of Dutch and American personnel who knew the location of the buried treasure were either killed in the fighting or evacuated. The secret of its location was lost in the chaos of battle. After the war, when the Dutch government came to reclaim its fortune, no one could find it. The landscape had been transformed by military construction, and the men who held the secret were gone. For decades, Rumors have swirled among the residents of the Aleutians about a lost hoard of gold. Was the treasure ever really there? Or is it a wartime legend? If it was there, was it secretly recovered by a handful of soldiers who kept it for themselves? Or does a vast fortune in Dutch gold still lie buried somewhere beneath the cold volcanic soil of a Maknak island, waiting to be discovered? It remains one of the last, great lost treasure mysteries of the Second World War. And so, our journey through the fog of the Second World War comes to a close. We have stood on the shores of a vanished colony, peered into the pages of an unreadable book, and walked the empty decks of a ghost ship. We have contemplated the quiet decline of an entire civilization and pondered the fate of an object believed to hold the presence of God. These stories, in their lack of resolution, teach us a unique kind of humility. They remind us that history is not a complete and finished text, but a living, breathing thing, with pages that are torn, faded, or simply blank. They invite us not just to seek answers, but to sit comfortably with the questions themselves, to appreciate the vastness of what we do not know. For it is in these great unsolved mysteries that we find the true frontiers of our knowledge and a profound and enduring sense of wonder.